Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Mixed signals. President Trump says Israel and Hezbollah agree to halt attacks after Iran suspends talks with the U.S. over fighting in Lebanon. Equities retreat from all-time highs as progress towards a U.S.-Iran peace deal stalls, and investors pause after a rally in AI stocks. But investors are still digesting news on AI, with Anthropic filing confidentially for an IPO and Alphabet seeking another $80 billion for its spending. It's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Abiy Ahmed in Dubai. Let's take a quick look at what markets are doing this morning. The AI pause is real. This is what we're seeing reflected in the U.S. futures picture this morning. 0.4% down. Now, the S&P did close in positive territory yesterday, but the futures image, again, perhaps paints a picture of what's to come later today. Now, this is led by the U.S., Iran stalling on a deal, but also investors pausing after these massive rallies that we saw in the AI trade. MSCI Asia Pacific 0.4% down, led by the Kospi in South Korea. We have Winnie a little bit later to speak to us about the details on that. Brent prices down this morning. Now, they surged yesterday after these reports that we saw emerge about Iran pausing talks with the U.S. because of a no resolution in Lebanon. Now, they're down slightly a bit this morning. Brent at $94 a barrel. U.S. Treasury yields not doing much on the 10-year notes this morning, but again, they've been moving with what we've been seeing coming out of the Middle East. Now, if we flip the board, a chart that I thought was interesting, flagged by our colleague Anthony Stevens, was about the SOX index and the relation with some of the server stocks. Now, we saw a rally in the likes of Lenovo, Dell, and HPE. And if you look at the massive gains in the chart this morning, so what we saw is HPE is up 30% in the aftermarket, or was up 30% in the aftermarket, following a 30% move higher by Dell and Lenovo last week. So investors are now, according to Anthony, focused on what households would think about, don't they make laptops, and then concerns about memory prices and oil, and some of the bearish sentiment that we've seen in the market is reflected in the chart. But also this is obviously plugged against the SOX index, which is a gauge for semiconductors, which have been doing amazingly well this year. But for more on what is happening in Asian markets, we have Winnie Su in our Singapore bureau for us. Winnie?
Yeah, good morning, Abir. You can see that the AI rally is really taking a breather here in Asia, and we are looking at the tech stocks actually leading declines, with South Korea's Kospi index and Japan's tech-heavy Nikkei 225 both down more than 1%. Now, the outlier today here is really actually in the tech space in Hong Kong. You're looking at HS Tech here up 3.5%, with gains led by Tencent after Financial Times reported that the company is in fact getting close to a new launch of AI agent for WeChat, and that is really showing how Tencent is ramping up their investment and their capabilities in AI. Now, you flip the board and take a look cross asset-wise. We're looking at the Japanese yen here hovering just around that 160 level against the dollar. Now, that is also showing that the weakness of the Japanese yen continues, and prompting the finance minister Satsuki Katayama to warn that the authorities may take steps if they see further needs to do so. Now, we also have the Korean won here under pressure today. We did actually have pretty strong inflation numbers, accelerating way faster than expectation. However, because of that forced selling of stocks for the past 17 days, we are actually seeing further pressure weighing on the South Korean won. Back to you, Abir.
Winnie, thank you so much for those details. That was Winnie Su in our Singapore bureau. Now, AI giant Anthropic has filed confidentially for an IPO, setting up a high-stakes race with rival OpenAI. The move comes just days after a massive funding round valuing the company at nearly $1 trillion. This is as both AI firms rush to hit public markets. Let's bring in Manuel Baigori, who leads our APAC deals coverage, for more details on this story. Manuel, thank you for joining us this morning. What details do we know about this secretive IPO? I saw the headline flashing last evening. What more can you tell us about Anthropic's possible IPO?
Definitely a huge IPO lurking in the horizon. I mean, the U.S. Market for IPOs is heating up, and the likes of Anthropic, among others, are keeping us real busy. Obviously, the confidential filing is a significant step in the potential offering. That may still obviously take some time. And as you all said, this is going to be a massive equity offering. Obviously, the market needs to be there and need to be able to absorb such a big share sale. But definitely everything related to AI these days, one of the hottest areas of investing, not just in the US, but globally. We are seeing the same here in Asia as well, with multiple potential offerings coming to Hong Kong. And the reality is, obviously, the sheer size of these companies. I mean, you were referring at the really large fundraising deal that Anthropic just pulled off as well. I mean, it's just a clear sign that investors can't get enough of these companies, and that there is a lot of faith in the potential growth for companies in this space. Obviously, we are also keeping track of other big IPOs in the US. SpaceX definitely top of that list as well. So the number of multi-billion-dollar IPOs is definitely increasing.
Yeah, let's stick with AI, but another company, another huge company, Alphabet, it is planning to raise about $80 billion in equity for AI spending. Now, is it playing catch-up with other members of the Mag 7 cohort, like Amazon? We saw its debt issuance back in March. How crucial is the raising money aspect when it comes to funding its AI goals?
Yeah, the funding, it's actually a critical part of AI development. As we've seen in companies across the board, all platforms are trying to jump into the bandwagon of AI, and they're raising money as fast as they can, because they also know that they need that cash to be deployed in the development of the infrastructure for that AI resources as well to be in place. So obviously every company around the world is kind of like trying to think of AI and how they can benefit and also kind of like be ahead of the competition. Now, I think what we're likely to see here is some winners and losers as the dust settles over the coming quarters and years as well. But it's still a little bit early. Obviously, there is still plenty of capital chasing these opportunities, and companies want to address that and be first and forefront and try to get bigger before someone else does. So it's a really interesting race, and we're seeing platforms, companies, firms across the spectrum in finance and tech coalescing globally in this purpose.
Thank you, Manuel. That was Manuel Baigori, who leads our APAC deals coverage on the winners and losers of the AI race. Now, oil prices are in focus as conflicting signals from the Middle East cloud prospects for a peace deal. The impasse negotiations is fueling concerns that higher energy costs will stoke inflation and force the Fed to keep interest rates higher for longer. Joining us to unpack market sentiment is Sree Kochugovindan, Senior Research Economist at Aberdeen Investments. Sree, thank you for joining us from London early this morning. Let's start with the inflation outlook. Now, you said a couple of weeks ago, I was watching your interviews, that it was a wait-and-see moment for the outlook on inflation, and we have to wait to see what happens in the Strait of Hormuz and disruptions there to be able to better gauge what the headline numbers will tell us. Is that still the thinking there? Is it still wait and see amid all this uncertainty coming out of the Middle East?
I think so, because at the moment what we have is the impact of energy price rises across different inflation measures globally. So that we can see. But then obviously there are various steps towards other parts of the inflation spectrum as well that we need to consider. And so the longer the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, the bigger the risks in terms of the feed through into core inflation, the feed through into food prices next year. That's more of a it's a delayed timeline from fertilizer prices today to food prices in the future. But also, we haven't seen an impact on inflation expectations yet materially across different countries. So that would be the key driver for central banks, actually. That is what central banks are watching rather than just the headline number. Yeah. So in terms, when I say wait and see, we already have the impact of energy prices or higher oil prices, and that's starting to materialize, but it's the rest of the inflation spectrum that central banks are watching very closely.
And speaking of central banks' actions and what possibly could come out of that, one of the main economic data or key data that we're looking out for is the U.S. employment data for May coming out this Friday. What are you watching there, and how does that really impact the sentiment or impact the decision-making from the Fed, that hawkish tilt that we've been talking about for the past couple of months at this point, certainly since the start of the war in the Middle East?
Yes. I think so. The Fed doesn't look at just the one number, but the underlying trend. And what we saw was very volatile prints earlier this year because of the shutdown, and some very strong numbers as well in April, and in March and April. So what we're looking for now is potentially the expectation. I think consensus is around the 80 to 100 sort of range, 100,000 range for non-farm payrolls print for the employment change. Yeah. So that would be in line with, a stable labor market, something that's a slower trend, a trend that's closer to, I think it's around 55,000 over a 4-month moving average. So that's what they're going to be watching. It's not a collapse of the labor market at this stage in the US. There's still a lot of resilience there. It's just a slower trend. So the growth story doesn't really justify hikes. It doesn't justify cuts, but there's not enough in there for hikes either in terms of the inflation story. So I think the central bank there, despite all the debate that we're having about Warsh being very dovish and more hawkish speakers, I think there's an internal debate which actually leads us to a bit of policy paralysis and the Fed to be on hold for a meaningful period of time while we go through this conflict.
So it's wait and see when it comes to the Fed as well, and the Fed raising or cutting rates, Sree. But look, I want to pivot to another region. I want to pivot to Japan. It's been in the headlines for a while this year, and the yen is the worst performing G10 currency so far this year. Now, how soon do you see a BOJ rate hike, essentially, and do you see another intervention looming?
I think so. I think, first of all, if we start with the yen, the currency itself, we did have some in late April and early May, we did see a bout of intervention, some very powerful intervention there from the Ministry of Finance in Japan. But it's very challenging backdrop for the Ministry of Finance and for the yen in particular, because at the moment, while we're going through this conflict, what we will have is a very strong dollar environment. The dollar has become the go-to currency. It's a safe haven bid at the moment. It is the hedge for the conflict at the moment. It has been since the conflict broke out, the main hedge. So it's very difficult to challenge that. But obviously, the 160 level of the yen to the dollar is a psychological threshold that market investors keep testing. So I think to that part of your question, I agree that further intervention is probably necessary while we're going through this conflict.
Yeah.
Until the Strait of Hormuz reopens, I think the yen will remain
Yeah.
challenged, unfortunately. But with the Bank of Japan,
Right.
we are expecting a hike,
Yeah.
yes. I think July, but there is a chance of June. But I think more importantly is what they say about the balance sheet as well.
Thank you so much for that update on Japan and the U.S. Sree Kochugovindan of Aberdeen Investments, thank you very much for your time this morning. Now, coming up, President Trump aims to calm Lebanon tensions as Iran suspends talks with the U.S. amid ongoing clashes between Hezbollah and Israel. We'll have the latest from the region next. This is Bloomberg. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have so far offered differing accounts of a call about the fighting in Lebanon. Trump said in a Truth Social post he had asked the Israeli leader, quote, not to go into a major raid of Beirut. Meanwhile, Netanyahu says Israel's campaign in southern Lebanon would continue. Joining us now to unpack all of this is Bloomberg Rosalind Matheson. Roz, thank you for joining us this morning. Now, yet another contradiction between the warring sides. What is the latest we know about the position that President Trump had given, but the Iranian side as well?
Well, that's right. As you were saying, we seem to every day get this series of differing accounts of where we're at in terms of the negotiations or understandings around this conflict. And in the latest one, as you were saying, is Donald Trump saying that, you know, the Israeli Prime Minister agreed to his request, he says, to not conduct those planned raids or threatened raids on southern Beirut, which is long known as being a bit of a stronghold for Hezbollah. And Donald Trump also saying Hezbollah has agreed to stop striking Israel, and Israel has agreed in turn to stop any of its offensives in Lebanon. However, the Israeli Prime Minister says, OK, I will stop those planned strikes on Beirut if Hezbollah stops striking us. But for now, we're going to continue our operations as planned in southern Lebanon. So he's very insistent that they're not exactly pulling back entirely from their operations there. And that's really important because Iran has really twinned what's happening in Lebanon to the broader conversations around getting a deal with the US and saying without the fighting stopping in Lebanon, they're not going to agree to a deal. So it's really tied into those broader conversations.
Yeah, and speaking of those broader conversations, now Lebanon is seemingly one of those sticking points in the broader draft agreement between Iran and the U.S. But what else do we know about the other sticking point? Is it pretty much still the same that we were talking about over the past couple of months? Is it more? And where is what's happening leaving the broader agreement between the two?
Well, there's a real sense of confusion around all of it, even if talks are going on, or at least through mediators are going on, because Iran says, hang on, we're not going to talk to you until the issue in Lebanon is resolved. Donald Trump says talks are going on and they're terrific. He's also saying stop talking about timelines for this. I mean, Donald Trump has repeatedly been saying we're going to get a deal very, very soon, we're very close, and then saying actually we're not going to rush it. So for markets, it's really difficult to understand exactly where this is at. As you were saying, there are a number of sticking points. Lebanon is one of them. There's a big issue, obviously, over the Strait of Hormuz itself. The US just wants free passage for all shipping there. You know, Iran says, hang on, you're going to have to pay tolls to get through. There are fundamental questions around that. There are fundamental questions around these frozen funds. Iran wants, as part of this deal, you know, billions of dollars unlocked. The US is saying, we're not so sure about that. And Donald Trump is under pressure at home not to give too much ground in these negotiations. So there's a whole lot of different questions, let alone what exactly is going to happen to Iran's nuclear program, which has sort of been a core of all of these tensions. So a lot in the air. Do they punt some of it till later? Do they try and just simply get the Strait of Hormuz open? But at this stage, it's very difficult to know exactly where these negotiations are at.
Yeah. Well, Roz, thank you so much for that update. That was Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson. Now, coming up, Bloomberg learns that Russian officials are warning Putin that war spending is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. We'll get more on that next. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg News has learned that Russian officials are warning President Vladimir Putin that spending on the war in Ukraine is on an unaffordable path. Joining us now to unpack this is Anthony Halpin, who leads our Russia economy and government coverage. Tony, talk to us about how serious the budget constraints are.
Yeah, I mean, things are getting much more difficult for Russia and their economy to sustain the cost of this war, and that's driving this dispute between defense officials and essentially the finance people who are charged with finding the money for the war. Russia's already spending more than it spent last year in terms of its budget deficit, which is bigger than the whole of last year already in the first 4 months. It had pretty anemic forecasts for growth already this year. They've just slashed that to practically nothing, 0.4%. So they're finding it increasingly difficult to keep the economy going and generating the money that they need for the war. And on the other hand, the Defense Ministry is saying, well, not only do we need the money that we already have, but we need much more, something like $36 billion to keep the war going. So Putin's under real pressure.
So when it comes to the spending cuts that are suggested, where are they likely to come from and how difficult will they be to implement?
Well, from what we've learned so far, President Putin is basically telling the Finance Ministry officials, look, try not to cut spending on defense, look elsewhere. But that means things like social commitments, pensions, which Russia has always considered very important to pay because pensioners are people who vote. They're also people who protest. Putin has spent a lot of his time trying to keep pensioners happy. So that's an area really which will be difficult to find cuts on. Others would be other social commitments like health and education and roads, which many Russians already consider is inadequate.
Yeah.
So they would see those cuts immediately.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see what Russia and what President Putin decides to do with that. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Tony. Well, let's take a quick look at markets before we head into the breaks. Equity futures this morning, U.S. still down. Treasuries also not doing much. Oil down slightly. It surged a bit yesterday after news about Iran and the United States, or Iran suspending talks with the United States when it comes to Lebanon and the fighting there. We'll have to wait and see, as Roz mentioned earlier. Now, coming up, we speak to Niamh McBurney from Control Risks on how President Trump is looking to keep the Iran negotiations alive. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Mixed signals. President Trump says Israel and Hezbollah agree to halt attacks after Iran suspends talks with the U.S. over fighting in Lebanon. Equities retreat from all-time highs as progress towards a U.S.-Iran peace deal stalls, and investors pause after a rally in AI stocks. But investors are still digesting news on AI, with Anthropic filing confidentially for an IPO and Alphabet seeking another $80 billion for its spending. It's just gone 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Abiy Ahmed in Dubai. We will take another quick look at markets this morning. S&P futures still in the red, 4/10, down. Now, this follows a performance in the green over the past few days. The S&P did close its 9th week in the green. Up until last week, it had a positive close yesterday as well. But this perhaps paints the picture of what we're seeing coming out of the Middle East, the disruptions there, the stalling in the talks. Iran yesterday saying through semi-official media that it will suspend talks with the U.S. over Israel's fighting in Lebanon. So this paints that, but also perhaps a pause in the AI trade, a pause in investors purchasing the AI names, essentially. MSCI Asia Pacific 4/10 down as well, led by the bellwether for tech in the region, the Kospi. Brent crude prices retreating slightly this morning. Now, they did surge yesterday after news came out about Iran saying it will suspend talks with the United States over the fighting that has been happening with Lebanon, or the Lebanese militia Hezbollah. And then when it comes to the U.S. Treasury yields, the 10-year notes not doing much this morning. The yield on the 10-year notes slightly down 4.43% this morning. But Asia is trading already, and we want to know what details there are. So we have Winnie Su in Singapore for us. Winnie?
Yeah, morning, Abir. As you just mentioned, we are seeing a bit of a slowdown when it comes to that AI rally, especially now with uncertainties around the U.S.-Iran deal. Now, Kospi here, as you mentioned, down 2%, leading declines. We are seeing foreign investors selling Korean stocks for the past 17 days already. Now, the bright spot today in Asia is, in fact, in tech stocks in Hong Kong, with Tencent jumping more than 7% after the Financial Times reported that the company is getting close to a new AI agent launch for WeChat. So it really goes to show how the company is ramping up their AI investments. Now you flip aboard, I want to show you a very exciting chart here as we keep you updated on the global market cap race. So for the latest, we have South Korea overtaking India's market cap and now is officially the world's 6th biggest stock market, following just after Taiwan. Now the value is now around $5 trillion, and that is really supported by the two big chip makers, Samsung and SK Hynix, both in that $1 trillion valuation club. Back to you, Abir.
Thank you so much for that update, Winnie. That's Winnie Su in our Singapore bureau. Now, President Trump says Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to dial back the fighting after he talked with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and communicated with Hezbollah through mediators. Iran earlier said it was suspending talks with the U.S. over fighting in Lebanon, which it says must stop as a part of a broader peace deal. Joining us now to unpack the details of that is Niamh McBurney, Associate Director at Control Risks. Niamh, thank you for joining us this morning. Now, look, let's unpack the contradictions we've been hearing about over the past few hours, over the past days, over the past week as well. What do you make of these contradicting statements? I know that we've been seeing similar trends since the start of the war, since the deal was starting to get approached. But what do you make of these latest developments between President Trump, Netanyahu, the Lebanese and Iranian side?
We've had a few really important moments over the last 10 days. Last night was one of them. We think that ultimately the war is going to end, that there is going to be a memorandum of understanding signed between Iran and the US. It'll probably be pretty limited. It will probably focus on the Strait of Hormuz, as had been trailed over the last 10 days or so. But 10 days ago, there was a call between Arab leaders, regional leaders, and President Trump. And for us, that was a major turning point in the path that we're going down. And we see that as the kind of major pivot point towards an eventual end to the war. However, developments last night showed us that there are still challenges, and that Iran decided to use its very particular leverage with regard to Lebanon. because Iran has, since the beginning of the conflict, sought an end to the war on all fronts. And by that, it includes the IDF operations in Lebanon. And it very successfully leveraged, that connection and that red line last night to prompt President Trump, apparently through communications through US diplomats with Niamh McBurney, who really, I think, is going to be an absolutely pivotal figure in the coming weeks. But it shows you how much there is unfinished in the negotiations between both the US and Iran, that there is still a great deal to negotiate the finer points. And Israel's own particular position here could be a bit of a spoiling factor over the next coming weeks and months. But we do ultimately think that we're on a positive path, even if it is a very, very long and slow one.
Right. So the positive path that would possibly lead to a broader deal between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. Now, the JCPOA was reached in 3 years. How realistic is it that this deal, or this pathway to a broader deal, is reached within months, really, and with the imminent threat of a looming war, higher energy crisis, the outlook on inflation is higher? How realistic is that expectation?
So when it comes to the potential documents we have in the months ahead, the one that we can be optimistic about is this memorandum of understanding, this probably single page, half a dozen points document. When it comes to a replacement to the JCPOA, that is going to take months, if not years, to your point exactly. The original JCPOA took 3 years to negotiate, but that was in a context of where there had been ongoing communications between Iran, US, and European officials for at least a decade before that on something similar, and in trying to bridge the gaps then. Politically, the environment we're in is very, very different now. There is a much weaker or less space for diplomacy, although it is ultimately to Donald Trump's credit that he has created, even though an indirect line of communication, quite a strong indirect line of communication with Iran. But when it comes to an ultimate JCPOA replacement, that is probably not going to be signed by the time President Trump's term is finished.
Right. I want to bring it a little bit to the GCC, and this is probably the first time we've seen such a direct involvement of countries in the region in a war of the same sort. Now, when it comes to the sense that I've been hearing about a lot over the past 3-4 months, the new normal, how resilient do you think GCC countries are to overlook this war once, if it is over? And what is the biggest threat? Is it a nuclear-powered Iran, or the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing flaring up every now and then?
So if there's any kind of positives out of this war, it is the extraordinary resilience of the Gulf states that we have seen in the last several months. A lot of the processes and systems that were put in place immediately on the war starting were developed during COVID, as every country around the world had to adapt to those conditions. And the war provided a similar moment here. And because of the Gulf states themselves had reacted very well to COVID, they were very well placed to respond very quickly, very, very effectively. We've seen meaningful policy decisions already from a number of countries. Kuwait looking at tightening up its fiscal policy making in the last couple of weeks. The UAE announcing that it's going to focus on increasing domestic manufacturing. We have seen ADNOC announce an additional pipeline that will end in Fujairah. Saudi Arabia also making significant immediate investments and plans to expand that into its internal logistics sector that will benefit the whole GCC. I mean, that's happened in merely weeks, which is really fantastic, and hopefully all of these things will continue and become more embedded as the economies adapt to this situation. There's no doubt that the geopolitical situation in the region, as long as it continues, will still be very challenging, but that resilience has really shone through, and it shows you that countries can adapt, and they're not necessarily always prisoners to their geography. But Iran's kind of position on the nuclear file. We have seen it reinforce the nuances around its position in the last couple of days. With Iran saying that it was considering signing the MOU that included a clause that says it would not ultimately seek a nuclear weapon, and really that is a public position that Iran has confirmed, even if some people in the analytical community have their doubts about this. But if President Trump can with Iran sign an MOU that includes a commitment from Iran to not seek a nuclear weapon, that will be a renewed public commitment to that, and that will give the GCC states some confidence.
Yeah. We'll see what happens over the next few days. Niamh, thank you so much for your time this morning. This was Niamh McBurney, Associate Director at Control Risks. Now, coming up, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed looks set to secure another term. We'll get the latest on that story next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Abiy Ahmed in Dubai. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed looks set to secure another term. The election comes at a critical juncture as Africa's second most populous nation faces economic pressures, security challenges, and unresolved regional tensions. Our chief Africa correspondent, Jennifer Sapsaja, joins us now from London to unpack the story. Jen, was this election really ever in doubt, and what does the expected result out of this tell us about the future of Ethiopia's political landscape?
Well, Abir, the short answer is no. There were many people who were saying this was a foregone conclusion even before the voting started. And part of the reason is due to a few factors. If you take a look at the opposition, it had been fragmented over the past few months and year. There's also been concerns just about the domestic situation and security concerns and unrest. There's also been logistical challenges, which inevitably meant that a number of constituencies were deferred from actually voting. So that was part of the concern there. But it just, again, speaks to some of the challenges that we are seeing with Ethiopia domestically and also regionally. Domestically, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been at odds again, renewed tensions between him and his administration and the TPLF, which is an opposition party. There's also been renewed fighting between armed groups in other parts of the region. And it's not just domestically. Regionally, Ethiopia has gained a few more tense tense relationships between countries like Somalia. There's also Eritrea. Ethiopia has been concerning countries like Egypt as well for the building of a dam that we saw open last year. And then there's also complications with the war in Sudan. And so there's really concern about just the political situation in Ethiopia and what that has meant really to any sort of peaceful democratic election. So that's really the context for what we were getting into this election with. So largely a foregone conclusion. Now really investors are paying attention to what happens next with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's new administration.
So with his new administration and with his upcoming term or expected term, what are the personal challenges that he would be facing?
There's quite a few that investors are paying attention to. If we take a look at inflation, it has climbed. We've also been paying close attention to what has happened with the Ethiopian birr, which is the currency. And so investors are really watching for stability coming into this new term for Prime Minister Ahmed. There's also the continued talks with bondholders that have really stalled any negotiations with the IMF. That has precluded the country from moving forward and at least stabilizing some of the economic woes that they had experienced in the past few years. So those are some of the downsides. On the positive, though, we have actually seen the new securities exchange launch last year, which many investors were applauding. And so we are seeing some progress there. And Prime Minister Ahmed also relieved the state, a number of state monopolies. And so there has been a bit of progression in terms of the economy within Ethiopia, but really investors are looking for stability and reform to continue in order to feel confident that it is moving in the right direction, despite some of the challenges that it's facing domestically and also regionally.
Jen, thank you so much for the latest on that story. That was Jennifer Zapozacha, our chief Africa correspondent. Now, for a look at some of the other stories that we're following, South African lawmakers have elected Makashule Ghana to lead the committee investigating President Cyril Ramaphosa's handling of a robbery at his game farm. The impeachment inquiry is now underway, though Parliament is seeking legal advice after Ramaphosa filed a lawsuit seeking to halt the process last month. South African gasoline prices are set to hit a record high this month after the government rolled back some temporary fuel relief measures. The price of 95-octane petrol will rise to more than 28 rand a litre, about $1.72 from Wednesday. The increase comes as the Iran war continues to drive up energy costs, though consumers will see some relief from lower diesel and paraffin prices. And Congo has reopened the main airport in the province hardest hit by the Ebola outbreak. Authorities say screening and surveillance measures are now in place to manage travel risks, with passengers subject to temperature checks. The move comes as officials report tentative signs the outbreak may be slowing, though challenges remain in tracing contacts and investigating suspected cases. And coming up, we will discuss Turkey's economy as it cools from the impact of the Iran war. We'll discuss the challenges as the country is facing them. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Abir Abu Omar in Dubai. Now, Bloomberg has learned that the UAE's conglomerate IFFCO Group has drawn preliminary interest from multiple bidders. The assets could be worth several $billions, but buyers haven't yet made formal offers, and any decisions will likely only come after courts rule on the company's future. IFFCO has about $2 billion in debt, and its creditors include HSBC and Emirates NBD. Emirates Telecom is divesting 12.5% of its 50% stake in Korean Technologies to Uber. The stake is being sold for a total cash consideration of $100 million. And Turkey's economy cooled in the first quarter of 2026, growing 2.5% year-on-year. That compares with 3.4% growth in the first quarter of 2025. The slowdown came as the central bank moved to tighten monetary policy and deter risks related to the Iran war. For more, we're joined by Onur Ant, our managing editor for the Middle East and North Africa. Now, Onur, let's start with the economic part of things. Why the slowdown in the economy during the first quarter on an annualized base? What are the details that we're seeing out of the latest report?
Well, Turkish GDP, to be clear, has been in a slowing trend for about 4 quarters in a row now. And in a sense, you could argue that this is exactly what you would expect from a tight monetary policy framework, which Turkey had in place for about 3 years now. So on the one hand, you could argue that tight monetary policy is doing the job, the intended job, like everybody else expected. The problem here is that while economy has been slowing down, inflation has been slowing as fast as expected. It still remains well well above 30%, and that just makes it extremely difficult for the Turkish Central Bank, if at all possible, to lower interest rates at some point. So you have this combination of slowing growth and still very high, stubborn inflation. And that's not the kind of combination that any politician, let alone President Erdogan, would like to have going into another election season. Now, the next elections are scheduled in 2028, but given it's Turkey, it's always a possibility that they may be held even earlier.
Yeah, which brings me to my next question, and that is the fact that Turkish courts have recently unseated the leader of the political opposition. What does the opposition look like now, and how does Erdogan's grip on power look like?
Well, I think we can easily talk about a state of political turmoil, which, to be fair, has been the regular state of play in Turkey for the last 15 years or so. As you said, a younger generation of leaders who had taken over the Turkish opposition party, the Turkey Republican People's Party, 3 years ago, had won major election victories against President Erdogan in municipal vote in 2024. And now they have been ousted from the leadership position by Turkish courts. And they say that this is Erdogan's way of engineering a docile opposition through court decisions. Now, obviously, that's rejected by Erdogan and his allies. But the bottom line is Turkish opposition, although being reinvigorated just 2 years ago, is now facing a fresh leadership crisis. And it's just extremely difficult to see how they could mount a credible challenge to Erdogan should the president decide to hold a snap vote earlier than 2028 and seek another term in office, Abir.
Onur, thank you so much for that update, that important update on both the political and economic side of what is happening in Turkey. That was Onur Ant, our managing editor for the Middle East and North Africa. Now, Serena Williams is coming back to professional tennis at the age of 44. She dominated the sport for 2 decades before moving away from the daily grind of competition in 2022. First up for the 23-time Grand Slam singles champion is the doubles tournament at Queen's Club. Now, to turn back to markets and how they're doing before the end of our show, equity futures in the U.S. are still down 0.3%. Nasdaq, Dow Jones doing the same thing. Euro Stoxx 50 futures are up 0.5%, a reversal of the picture we were seeing yesterday. Brent crude prices are slipping slightly this morning after a surge yesterday with the news of Iran suspending talks with the United States over the fighting that we're seeing in Lebanon. Now that's it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Abiy Ahmed in Dubai. This is Bloomberg.